I am scared to make this video. Never before have I seen such a character that has divided a community in such broad ends of the spectrum. Some people hate, and I mean hate Astarion. But where there is a duality, there's life. Some people love and adore this character. Every character within Baldur's Gate probably has their own fan base making TikTok edits, and you know the ones I'm talking about. Take for example, if Priestess Gut was your favorite character like she's mine, you might see something like this while scrolling.
Maybe I can help with that. Us true souls gotta look out for one another.
Big guy, bend over, big guy.
Astarion has his own book coming out. This character's voice actor won the Voice Actor of the Year because of this performance. Some people swear he's the greatest thing since milk. Others think Astarion is an abusive soy boy who has zero morals. It's really odd how split the community is on him. Truly, seeing the comments across every poll and video that I've put out, so many people have either told me not to do this video or have begged for it. I think it says something that it took us this long to get to Astarion. He is overdone because he's popular. There are analysis videos out there already. There are videos explaining his behavior and others ridiculing him. Today, my personal challenge is providing us, the audience, with a fresh take, to put to rest a few topics, and to answer a few other questions. Today's video will be similar to videos we've covered before with characters like Gale or Karlach, in the sense that I want to see why people hate this character, but also discover why gamers possibly didn't click onto this character right away. At the same time, we're going to try to understand the camp of people who love Astarion. But of course, this wouldn't be a XX video if we didn't wrap the analysis in as we look at his writing. As for me, that is truly what makes a character great. I'll remain as objective as I can be while we dive into the writing techniques, plot outline, story beats, character arc, and romance for Astarion. Using my decade of screenwriting experience and over 950 hours in this game, I myself want to see if his hype is just that, hype. And I also want to see if his hate is unwarranted or if there's some basis for why people don't like him. Without further ado, sit back, grab yourself a bowl of chili with Tostitos scoops and an iced tea chilled for exactly 26 hours, because this video will be a very, very long one. Our first introduction to Astarion comes in the form of him calling out for help. As we approach him, he asks us to help kill one of those brain things. Regardless if you agree to help or turn your back to him, Astarion will attempt to put a knife to your throat and interrogate us on what we know regarding the Mind Flayers. He assumes we're in league with them until our tadpoles connect. From his POV, we see Astarion prowling through the streets as the vision fades, the narrator specifically mentioning the fear of light. Astarion actually apologizes for holding a knife to our throat, and then Tau proceeds to provide what little they do know about the tadpole, revealing that it'll transform them into mind flayers if not cured. Astarion suggests finding someone that can control these things before he gets invited to join the pack and our camp. Okay, as far as intros go, this has some bright spots, but also, already present perhaps, is a hurdle for some people. Being attacked by a companion isn't necessarily an uncommon thing in the series. Lae'zel attempted to kill us before the tadpole intervened. Minthara is, well, Minthara's Minthara. Minsk tried to kill us, but to be fair, he was being misled onto who we were. Astarion? Well, he somehow thought it would be a good idea to pull a knife on a group of 3 to 4 adventurers. It's my belief that for some people, his attempt to murder us here turned them away from Astarion right away. Now, something we'll have to explore with this character more than perhaps any other that we've analyzed is why he does certain things. On the surface, this appears to be a very stupid move. Why would you attack someone? For Lae'zel, she attacks you, but given the circumstances of you being on a nautiloid and her thinking you're a thrall of a mind flayer, I'm going to allow this. For Astarion, I can theorize from what we'll learn soon about him is that he was scared. This is how a cornered animal would respond, and again, we don't know anything about him yet. but a character taking such a drastic action like this, for me at least, makes me curious as to why they would do something like this. And something you'll learn here about Astarion is that he, not counting Minthara, is probably the most morally evil character of the bunch. He's got the pragmatism of Lae'zel, the ambition of Gale eventually, the self-preservation and deception of Shadowheart. But unlike everyone, Astarion actually leans into all of these traits, not viewing them as bad things, but rather good things. He is the most morally questionable member of the party, which does give him a uniqueness to himself. But we want to learn more about him because the hope is he isn't like this for the sake of it, and that he has layers, an arc, and a very good, fleshed out story to tell said arc. Essentially what I'm trying to say is that hopefully the reason he's like this has a purpose. Let's move on. For Astarion, he'll immediately set us up for the first part of his story, presented as a fun mystery, where he attempts to hide the fact that he's a vampire. The first sign of this is as he offers to watch over the camp while we sleep. The tone in which it's said suggests perhaps that Astarion might be hiding something, which of course, as we later learn, he is. He also reminisces on how different sleeping outdoors and his entire surroundings feel for him, which, considering he'd spent the last 200 years in a mansion/dungeon, checks out. We don't know why he'd say this at the time. It's only later, when we find out more of his backstory, that we can return to little comments like these, and realize that these are all very well timed and properly implanted lines that reference his past. There's an actual point to what he's saying. We just don't know it. Yet. What we do get, however, is another breadcrumb, as we get a short cutscene of Astarion sneaking away from our camp, following us initiating a long rest. We're not able to call him out for this since our character didn't see this, and this is a smart move. This is a trick used often in film or writing. We show the audience something, but not the main character. This is a classic suspense-building tactic, often used by one of my favorite directors, Alfred Hitchcock, who is a master of this. And the suspicious behavior continues when we stumble on a dead boar laying in the middle of the road. The unusual part is that there is a cutscene for this seemingly random boar, and what's even odder is that Astarion seems slightly annoyed that we're paying any attention to it. If we pass a medicine check, we can notice that the blood has been drained from the boar, and then proceed to ask Astarion if he recognizes this. He does, citing it's the mark of a vampire. He knew, but he didn't want to scare us, is what he says. Okay. By this point, Astarion is coming off like an extremely... what's the word the kids are using nowadays? A sussy baka? Yeah, the guy's acting really weird. But this is good. Him offering to stand watch and assuring us not to worry is strange too. Like, didn't you just try to kill me 2 days ago? It's very contradictory behavior, but that is exactly what someone in Astarion's shoes would do if they were trying to hide this secret. People who lie will typically tell you whatever you want to hear, not really worried about trying to match their behavior. Finding the boar and passing the subsequent checks is the first real big indicator of something seriously wrong with Astarion, and I like it. It's subtle and small, and Neil Newbon, the voice actor behind Astarion, and as I'll praise him several times throughout this video, does a great job with his tonal shifts, displaying the uncomfortableness that Astarion is feeling in this moment. As a player, I might not be interested so much in Astarion since we still don't know much about the guy, but I'm at least curious to see what exactly he's hiding. Astarion adds to this mystery when we ask him to tell us a little bit about himself. He gives us one line. He was a magistrate back in the city. What more is there to tell? In an isolated instance, this can be viewed as both good and bad writing. If I'm playing through this game for the first time, and I'm annoyed at Astarion for pulling a knife on me, him providing practically nothing other than one line in regards to his past isn't going to make the player more interested, unless they've clocked that there is an ongoing mystery or something off about Astarion. At the same time, when reviewing this as a whole, this line is well done, because true to Astarion's character at this point, he shouldn't be disclosing much. He can't let his secret out. When you want a character to withhold information, look to Shadowheart in this same game on how to do it right. It's made a bit more obvious that she's hiding something because not only does she openly acknowledge that she doesn't or can't tell you certain things, but we also can use our tadpole and call her out for her secrecy. Plus, through the game, we have encounters with wolves and Selûnite statues that open up more of Shadowheart's wound and past on her hand. And soon, so much stuff occurs that she's practically forced to tell us as we begin to suspect more and more suspicious things going on. We don't really get that hint here at all with him. Following this, technically, the mystery can be revealed, but I want to include one cutscene that most players won't probably see, and I hadn't seen until I, of course, had, and was so surprised to see it. You see, Astarion's scene where he bites you is a pretty low priority cutscene, and can oftentimes get pushed down the pecking order if you have more important cutscenes that need to happen. So, depending on gameplay and the amount of long rests, you might not learn of his vampirism for a while. If you manage to meet Gandrel and you still don't know he's a vampire, this scene here changes dramatically. Astarion will reveal that he has a bit of a racist problem with Gur people as you encounter Gandrel, a Gur monster hunter that tells us he's hunting a vampire spawn. Astarion asks a lot of questions. Why the hunter is hunting a vampire spawn, where he plans to take the spawn. And we notice all of this. What shocked me was what Astarion does next, which is stab Gandrel straight through the eye before turning around and claiming he'd just done us a favor, and that Gandrel would have killed them while they slept. I mean, wow. For those that are saying Astarion isn't evil, at least a little, where are we at now? I mean, if asked later, Astarion revels in how quick he was able to kill Gandrel, so he definitely enjoyed this, and yes, he is definitely at least a little bit evil. But at the same time, we have a conundrum all too similar to the previous. Assuming this is your first time seeing and playing this game, what a player's justification for keeping Astarion alive regarding roleplay reasons or not is beyond me. You would surely suspect something by this point. Say you're a paladin or a really good aligned character. What the heck do you do when you see something like this? Again, this is assuming that you haven't found out Astarion's secret. We will cover this scene again later, but I wanted to throw it in there as, with regards to this mini arc that Astarion has of hiding his secret, this is sort of like the Act 2 climax. It's extremely drastic, and you can feel that the walls are closing in around him. It's great in hindsight, but not so great for getting a player on your character's side. For Astarion, he can only keep the secret for so long. Upon one of your next long rests, you'll be awoken by Astarion, leaning over you, trying to take a bite of your neck as you catch him. He immediately attempts to lie, stating that it's not what it looks like, he wasn't going to hurt you, that he only feeds on animals. If you're like my girlfriend when this scene happened, you can stab him through the heart and kill Astarion, which will of course end his story. This is why I don't make my girlfriend mad, folks. However, if you choose to use the tadpole, you'll see Astarion feeding on rats as someone tells him to. Astarion reveals that those dark eyes we saw are his master's. He'll then ask you for one small favor. Please allow him to feed on you. As he states, he needs just a drop because he feels so weak. Choose to accept and Astarion will feed on you, possibly losing himself to his hunger and killing you. Yup. You can also put a stake through his heart if you misclicked earlier or decided that now you want to kill him. Successfully pass the speech check and he'll withdraw, happy and extremely thankful for you allowing him to quench his thirst. If you decline Astarion, he'll cower away to go find an animal to hopefully help sate him. Either route you choose, Astarion says that you both need to trust each other, and that Tav can trust him. That Tav needs Astarion strong. And with that, alive or dead, the scene ends. Holy smokes. Okay, if the case hasn't been made already, I feel comfortable making the case now. I think the reason some people don't like Astarion is for the streak of horribly morally questionable choices he's made in what amounts to about 10 hours of gameplay. He put a knife to our throat in our first meeting, murdered Gandrel, tried to bite us without our consent, and if we give him that consent, he might still end up killing us. He's a piece of you-know-what. But does that make a poorly written character? No, actually, it doesn't. Similar to Ashley from Mass Effect 1, who has a xenophobic racism issue, I never personally minded this. And that's not to say I don't condemn racism, because no, it's a vile thing, but it's still a character trait and a plot point for Ashley. And from a writing standpoint, despite it being an extremely negative character trait, it's a trait, and like I mentioned, it's a plot point, a place that we can develop this character to overcome her racism, which she does. Oddly enough, finding out her reasoning for why she hates aliens and seeing her transform into someone who accepts them is what makes her interesting. For Astarion, all of the stuff mentioned is enough to turn a player base away. For those players, Astarion either was killed or told to leave by a group of players because this was the final straw for most people. The mystery has also been revealed, and if the player hadn't put it together by now, then the aha moment occurs here. But more to the point a moment ago, having a morally questionable character isn't bad writing. You just have to showcase why they're making the choices they're making and give us some depth, just like you would with a morally good character, which I think Larian did. Look, by this point, we definitely know Astarion is selfish, and he's a liar. We now know that he was hiding his vampirism. To me, him doing everything he did kind of fits with a character keen on hiding a secret as big as that. And notice, I am not referencing any further context here. As a first-time player, this is what we know by this point, and even if you kill the Astarion here, you can't say that Larian didn't give him some substance into his actions and a small story. As I called it, it's a mini arc for Astarion, who, by the end, opts to finally tell you about his condition, albeit he was kind of forced to tell you. And this is where it gets a little bit tricky. Could Larian have written Astarion to be either less of a prick, or written some more scenes earlier in the game to garner any semblance of sympathy from the player towards him? 100%. Would it have made things better? Well, that's hard to say. You risk making Astarion's identity too blurred. As he is now, at this point in the story, he is interesting to me, and his actions ring true for a selfish person trying to lie and survive their way through. Ultimately, it's motivated by fear and his fight or flight. Do I see why players would turn away from him by this point? 200%. But oddly enough, this is about as bad as Astarion gets until Act 3. All of what we're seeing sort of had to happen. Allow me to explain from a writing lens. Often in writing, Act 1 serves the purpose of a setup. One such thing you set up is the behavior of your main character before they've changed and before the catalyst occurs. Showing a character's day-to-day is important. The same can be said for Astarion, and is why I said I'm not sure if adding some of those sympathy scenes would have made things necessarily better. We actually need to see the prickish behavior, the free lying and killing Astarion, before Tav, this adventure, and his arc. In order for a character to grow, we have to see where they're starting from. What are they growing from? In that respect, Larian has certainly set the groundwork for a character to change if they choose to take it. And to double that, they've also set his story up nicely to possibly explain not just why, but how Astarion ended up a vampire spawn. This is who Astarion was made to be, as we'll come to find out. This is who Astarion, truthfully, isn't. Let's move on. Following the reveal of Astarion's vampirism, we can ask him about his history. And surprisingly, Astarion reveals quite a bit. I would say this is the start of the next portion of his story, the build-up towards his scars. If you hadn't asked him already about himself, when asked here, he'll reveal he is a spawn, sired by a man named Cazador, and that he doesn't wish to remember much of his life before Cazador. Not that he could. When pushed, he'll give us the same answer, that he was a magistrate that helped keep the peace in Baldur's Gate. An interesting fall from grace for Astarion. When asked to elaborate on how he was turned, Astarion again is very open with the player. He reveals that some group of Gur, unhappy with the ruling he'd passed, found him at night and beat him within an inch of his life. It was here that Cazador found him and offered him either death or immortality as a spawn. We know what Astarion chose. We can then ask about his history, and he'll be frustrated that we keep asking, reiterating that he was a slave to the Tsar family, but that he was conveniently lost, never to be found again. The last piece of information Astarion gives us is a bit of insight into vampire culture, citing that the biggest threat to a vampire is another vampire, since all vampires are ambitious, paranoid schemers. They wouldn't want to create competition for themselves. We went from Astarion giving us practically nothing to dropping a lot. Let's break all of this down, because now we're starting to get into the crux of his writing. It's a bit of a character shift for him to be so honest, but seeing as how his biggest secret has been revealed, I'll allow this. Him being so open and honest could symbolize a bit of trust here as well. The story that Astarion weaves here also helps to explain some of his behavior. His hatred of Gur, for example, comes from the beating he received from them. He might blame all Gur people due to them being the catalyst for him becoming a spawn. His discussion of his past, of him being a magistrate tasked with keeping the peace, shows what Astarion was before. It's an interesting angle to think about, considering who we have in front of us is so violent. But the biggest piece of information we get is the first mention of Cazador. Astarion refers to himself as a slave and a puppet to his master. I think this establishment of his role for the last 200 years paints a pretty clear picture that Astarion still views himself as just that, a slave. His reveal that his diet has consisted of nothing but rats for the last 2 centuries also paves way to an explanation for his behavior on why he wanted to take a bite out of you. It's like you spent 200 years eating nothing but a cheeseburger without cheese, buns, pickles, or lettuce. And suddenly, you have the perfect burger sitting in front of you. I don't know about you, but I would probably take a bite from that burger, even if it was from Burger King. No hate to Burger King, just speaking facts. He's selfish, but as we learn, he has a reason to be. Astarion can walk in the sun. He is currently free from his abuser, and all around him are animals and people he can feast on. He's like a rabid animal that's just been let out of his cage to roam free. Wouldn't you or I act the same, fighting temptation but ultimately probably succumbing to it? I think finally getting the chance to hear Astarion's tale helps his character a lot. It's good writing, since this ties into all of the things that we've seen thus far regarding his behavior, but also his background shows how deep the roots go for Astarion, which is why he's acting this way. And this goes to my point earlier on him being a very psychologically deep character. I think it's easy to label him as a selfish prick, and while I'd agree with the assessment, it's not like he's like this for no reason. At this point in the story, he's finally starting to show some of his layers and become slightly more interesting. If you hadn't found Gandrel by this point, this scene then plays a little bit differently, where now you are in on the joke, and overall the scene is actually quite funny, as the two of you awkwardly skirt around the fact that this monster hunter is staring his target right in the face. And fun fact, you can actually give Astarion to Gandrel, which I just find that hilarious that that's even an option. And that is also something I want to add. I promise we'll get more into Astarion's story, but like Karlach, specifically Karlach, his characterization is fantastic, offering some of the most unique and funny, plus well-voiced lines in the entire game. Paired with the fact that, like Minthara, who is a pretty evil person, Astarion is very different from the remainder of the Origin characters, in that he is by far the most morally evil of the Origin bunch, and as such, his takes on situations are much different and typically darker than the rest of the party. If nothing else, when he reacts to things, it's from a more evil lens, and that makes him an interesting addition to the party. Speaking of unique, Astarion also is the only character of the entire party, not just Origin characters, but the entire party, whose story doesn't tie into the main plot of this game at all. His plot with Cazador is its own thing, and so you can look at that from two different lenses. Either you see this as a poorly written side story because it has no connection to the main story and is bad writing since it feels so detached from the events and characters around you, or you can see his story as a fresh take, unique from everyone because it isn't connected to the main plot. To each their own here. I do want to point out, though, that it's impressive he's so beloved, despite his story having no relation to the main plot. That's a sign that something was done right, since he has no naturally occurring story beats or moments to assist him. It's just his own story. Take Shadowheart, for example, whose personal quest kind of follows the main plot of the game, more or less. Especially getting to the Night Song. Okay, back to his story. Following our encounter with Gandrel, we can ask Astarion about this monster hunter, and he'll deduce that his master Cazador sent the Gur after him, no doubt to taunt him. He theorizes that the reason why the monster hunter didn't kill him, however, was because he wants to make an example of Astarion for running away. Finally, Astarion says that they aren't safe, speaking out of fear, hyping Cazador up as an extremely powerful vampire who commands a whole host of souls. This introduces this storyline properly now and sets the seed for Act 3's inevitable showdown. But, for the here and now, we don't know if Cazador might show up before Act 3, so this actually instills a bit of player anxiety as well. Also, it's a nice build-up for the climax of Astarion's story. It hints at the thousands of souls that Cazador has collected that, of course, Astarion helped collect, hence how he knows. Again, Astarion is speaking from personal experience here. When he talks, usually his words have layered meaning. We just don't know that until, of course, we learn more about his backstory. Further discussion with him regarding Cazador shows the Cazador was a tormentor, forcing Astarion to lure unsuspecting souls back to his palace and force him to either dine with him by feeding Astarion a rat, or if Astarion refused, then being flayed for hours at a time. It's clear that abuse is a large pillar of Astarion's story, and I'd have to imagine that now some sympathy is being won over here with the player. But I also do want to call Larian out slightly. For me, this is a little bit too expository, and I would have preferred either a bit of showing or a bit of variation on how we learn all of this information Astarion has given us. In an Origin Astarion playthrough, for example, you actually have nightmares of Cazador finding you. I think a fantastic inclusion, even on a non-Origin run, would have been including this. Let us see how Cazador torments Astarion. Let the player see and hear Astarion's fear. We could have also perhaps had an event trigger, perhaps a cave infested with rats or bats, and this triggers Astarion as he shares how he was forced to eat them, kind of like how Shadowheart reveals her fear of wolves by seeing an actual wolf. The substance of what he's saying isn't bad, it's the presentation here that I have a problem with. The pacing just feels a little bit off in my eyes, and it's clear that the writers are now doing their diligence by sharing his tragic backstory after having Astarion attempt to hide his secret since the moment we met him. I also mentioned that I'd cover his romance, and right about here is where you can begin to explore it. If you let Astarion bite you that night in camp, and have made some rather morally great choices, Astarion will tell you he knows that you want him, that you enjoyed him biting your neck, that he wants more of you. Oh god, we're getting into another slice of the fan base, aren't we? The 2009 Twilight fans. I can hear them. We should turn back before it's too late. That night, you find Astarion, shirtless, in the secluded spot that he'd mentioned. Neil Newbon turns the grumbly romance voice to 10, and Astarion and you sprawl out before you can offer your neck to Astarion, who will feed on you once more. It's a pretty disturbing scene in my opinion. It's not bad, I'm just saying it's different. I'm not really into the whole vampire thing, but if you are, hey, more power to you. Having him bite you here, however, was a good addition. When we awake, we see Astarion standing, his back to us. Literally etched into his back are some scars, a gift from Cazador, as Astarion mentions. If you pass the check, you can recognize that it's infernal, but Astarion, surprised to perhaps finally know what language is on his back, reveals that he doesn't know what it means or why Cazador did it. And with that, when one mystery ends, another mystery begins. Okay, so as being one of just 2 origins you can have a romance scene with prior to the Tiefling party, Astarion benefits a lot, because unlike Lae'zel's, which is a good scene but not as personal, Astarion's offers the lusty Argonian romance and then makes it extremely personal by revealing this sick detail. What's more, while we can probably expect Astarion's inevitable showdown with Cazador will occur, he still needs something to work towards until then. Where one mystery ends, another begins, and finding out what the scars on his back mean is that plot point that has just begun. Very well done, Larian. If you got the romance scene before the Tiefling party, Astarion will make some advances on you, using every line in his book of pickup lines as you two flirt. Again, for the Astarion Fan Club out there, you guys probably love this. You sick people. I joke. Something I want to point out here, though, is that all of this flirting isn't just to open the faucets while you watch this scene. No, this is actually some very good foreshadowing for a reveal much later. You see, all these lines that Astarion is using, he's practiced this over and over again for 200 plus years on thousands of people. He has gotten so good at telling people what they want to hear. He's using what he's good at to tempt you. The question is, does he actually mean anything he's saying? Oh, now that's interesting. What puts a cherry on top, however, is when he tells you, "I love you." Yeah, we can call him out for lying, and he'll agree that he is, but the way the scene is written, and what we learn later about Astarion, makes me wonder, did he mean any of that? I'd like to think so. This scene is actually his best yet with regards to subtext, as it shows the cracks starting to already form for Astarion. Who he once was is being met with who he is becoming, both from his newfound freedom, but also a budding romance that stemmed from him being given things that he wants and treated like a normal person, not a pet. Very good stuff here. Again, easy to dismiss this as fan service, but if you look deeper, it's far more than that. This is well done. The next major story beat for Astarion occurs once we've actually reached Act 2. Up to this point, we've gotten to know him a bit better. We see him enjoying his newfound freedom, wondering if this power he has will corrupt him. For the most part, his story has been fixated more on his inner conflict. But now, Larian, using that slow burn buildup that Astarion has, unleashes more of his outer conflict. And it starts when we find Astarion, shirtless, again, tracing his back scars. He is obviously struggling, and we can offer to help him. At first, he tells us that this isn't our problem, before we insist, telling him to shut up and turn around. It's here that Tab draws the scars into the dirt, and Astarion turns and is finally able to see it. The problem is, neither of you know what it means. Astarion is thankful, however, but as the saying goes, the plot has only thickened. Following up on this, Astarion shows some real agency in his story by saying that he's decided to ask Raphael for his help deciphering said text. In a bit of an eyebrow-raising moment, Astarion's plan is smart, but also highly risky given the nature of who you'd be dealing with. It almost seems like his confidence to oppose Cazador is growing, and this is a moment of that. We actually can ask Astarion what his plan is later on, and he'll say that as much as Cazador loves torture, that he suspects these scars mean something, that deciphering them might present a new plan. It's something he's obviously willing to do. As stated earlier, Astarion's outer conflict has really taken charge in this second act, but what Larian is also managing pretty well so far is a pretty realistic arc for Astarion. As a victim of abuse, Astarion, not me, him slowly putting more and more of his hand into the fire is an interesting personal development. Thanks to the help of Tab and the party, Astarion has gone from someone who would not dare go against Cazador to now juggling the idea of talking to Raphael to possibly oppose Cazador, his abuser. On the one foot, this shows just how desperate Astarion is to get rid of a problem, so much so he'd possibly sell whatever Raphael wanted to accomplish this goal. I think that's good writing, empowering Astarion to solve his own problems and showing how much he cares about this said goal through action and what he's willing to sacrifice is great. On the other foot, having him muster up the courage to develop some reasoning on what the scar is and then pivot to seeking Raphael's help gives him agency, as I stated earlier, but also shows Astarion's impulsiveness and tunnel vision, something that will only be amplified as we proceed with his story. This is more what I'd call consistent and good quality character writing. This might be the first moment Astarion is feeling that he might have something that can oppose Cazador, and already he's hyper-fixated on seeing if this idea will work. It's obsessive, but dangerous, like I said. And I promise I'll do a bit more analysis on the writing structure in a moment, but let's proceed just slightly more forward before we actually do that though. As we proceed to Last Light In, we actually do run into Raphael, and Astarion makes good on his claim by asking Raphael for help. True to the devil, he tells Astarion he'll get back to him, but is definitely interested in striking a deal. And with that, until we see Raphael again, we spend the rest of Act 2 in suspense on multiple levels. What do these scars mean? Where is Raphael? And worst of all, what kind of deal is Astarion willing to make? You could argue that the period in between this meeting with Raphael and when next we meet him stagnates Astarion's story a bit. And I'd actually agree here. Sure, you can run straight to the mausoleum, but from a first-time player's POV, you wouldn't do that. In defense of this space in between story beats, Larian has set the seedlings for the second mystery to be revealed. It's a mystery in itself of the deal Astarion will make, and of course a mystery on what the scars mean. There are plot points festering, so to speak. But this is still the weakest area of his story, no doubt. Momentum and pacing up to this point were actually pretty well done, and I feel like what was needed was a small breadcrumb in between. Now, thanks to the great characterization of Astarion, you don't perhaps feel this as much while roaming the Shadow-Cursed lands, but still, it would be remiss of me not to acknowledge the gap here. Nothing really happens for him. When we next find Raphael, I'd say we are about at the halfway line for Astarion's story, approaching what I'd call the midpoint. Now, Raphael in all of his poetic glory offers Astarion a pretty fair deal. All the party has to do is kill this utter menace that Raphael describes to us, and if we do, he'll gladly translate the text for us. Here is now Act 2's midpoint being laid out. Even a midpoint follows a structure, and as such, this would be Act 1 of the midpoint, otherwise known as the setup, and who better than Raphael to explain what we're going to have to do. Delving into the Sharan Temple itself is a big story beat, but it's supplemented brilliantly by the extra side stories held within, including Astarion's. Finding Yurgir, this is clearly the climactic portion, and this is helped by Yurgir's design and size, plus how difficult to fight this proves to be. Unless you attempt to talk your way out of it, to which Astarion will continually comment that we should be doing less talking and more killing. Astarion, my boy, the gift of gab is the only thing you need. Regardless of how you go about things, as long as Yurgir dies, you'll progress the quest. Also worth noting, failure to kill Yurgir leads to Astarion most likely either leaving the party or breaking up with you. Into Act 3 of the midpoint, our showdown with Raphael, who is now here to make good on his portion of his deal. Raphael reveals that what is carved into Astarion and his fellow spawn siblings' backs is a contract that will allow Cazador to sacrifice them all, plus a myriad of souls, to grant Cazador an ascension into a vampire ascendant, an extremely powerful vampire that can walk in the sun and no longer needs blood. This reveal is ultimately what passes us into the second half portion of Astarion's story, and now we can discuss structure for a moment. Something brilliant that Larian writers did was tie Astarion's arc with his story. I would argue up to this point, Astarion is changing into someone who is gaining more and more confidence. His ethics and morality haven't really changed at all. Simply, his belief in himself, his acceptance of who he is, and his thinking that Cazador might be someone he can stop is more what's changing. His structure for his story mirrors this, where at first, him hiding his vampirism and skirting the lines shows fear and anxiety towards what he is and being judged, killed, or returned to Cazador because of this. Once his secret is out and some trust is built, we then build to our next plot point, Cazador, and by extension, the Scars. Astarion speaks of Cazador at first with utter fear, and leans more towards ideas of escape or hiding from Cazador. The Scars being introduced, and the subsequent offer from Tav to draw it out, begins our build towards this point here with Raphael, and also mirrors Astarion's change in belief. Now, he is starting to piece things together, that perhaps these scars might mean something that can help him gain power over Cazador. Do we see how each plot point pushes and challenges Astarion to not just adapt, but to change? It's great stuff, and a good balance of inner and outer conflicts. Structurally, as I stated, we're officially into the second half of his story, and just like in good storytelling, as your book or film goes on, we've got to keep building the stakes here. Act 1. Astarion hides his secret of vampirism. Act 2. Astarion shares his history and scars, learning that he is actually an extremely important part to Cazador's grand plan of ascension. Act 3. Ruin Cazador's plans and kill Cazador. Simple. Each plot point means slightly more to the character, and each plot point leads to something bigger. It's a neat little cohesive story. I don't have much to write negatively about yet. Now, let's get into the second half of Astarion's story. From here, the ride gets pretty crazy. After talking with Raphael, we get the chance to really debrief and see where Astarion's head is at. Some excellent sassy man voice acting aside, Astarion finally suggests what we just spoke about. Yes, we could stop Cazador's plan, but what if I took his place? This suggestion is fully in line with Astarion's character. It's selfish, it's power-hungry. The suggestion also is in line with the underbelly of what Astarion can become, another Cazador. Following us helping him, the next romance scene can occur. Astarion wants to officially put a label on the two of you, and in one of the rare moments I'd wager, I have a problem with this entire scene. Up to this point, I don't feel like we've had too much on-the-nose moments. Astarion's writing has utilized show don't tell, subtext, depth, good timing, and clever setups pretty well. All of his dialogue has some sort of meaning behind what he's saying. But this admission of feelings for you is supplemented by trauma dumping. Astarion says how he had planned to seduce you just like everyone else. Habits of 200 years of seduction, he says. He then states that any form of intimacy he performed was only performed because of Cazador, and that now the feeling makes him loathe and feel disgusted when he gets intimate. He states even that he doesn't know how to be with someone before the two of you hold hands. Okay, let's back up for a minute. Is this diabolically bad writing? No. But the term on the nose in writing means that a character says exactly how they feel or exactly what they want, with no subtlety and no subtext included. What's worse, I feel like up to this point, you didn't need Astarion to explain all of his trauma. Couldn't we, the player, have put a few of these things together? I think so. I personally am not a fan of a writer so blatantly telling us everything on how a character is feeling. But my larger gripe is, what happened? Why did we need this recap on Astarion's feelings and his story thus far? Couldn't this have been either told differently or shown differently? What's that? Want me to provide an example? Sure. Okay. Astarion said how making love feels wrong. That for the last 200 years, he did his master's bidding solely to bring these souls he'd seduced back to their doom. Let's imagine this scene starts the same. Astarion is fighting to tell you something, but struggles to find the words. He leans into physical intimacy, but pulls back, because he's afraid. Everyone he's ever touched disappeared. He tells you that he doesn't want you to get hurt. Tav can reassure Astarion that he won't hurt them, that it's okay to be intimate with them, that Astarion can trust Tav. You don't understand. Everything Cazador lays his eyes on rots. You should get the hell away from me. And Tav can interject with a soft hug, silencing Astarion. Cazador will never take you away from me. I won't let him, is what Tav can say, and that reassurance can calm Astarion down. He can genuinely feel safe, and maybe even thank us. And the rest of what he originally said about loathing and such can be revealed perhaps later on down the line, but I still think you get the implication well enough here. I don't know, this is just one possible rewrite, but this scene did stick out to me as a bit lazy. It's a little bit too straightforward for a character who is anything but, and it kind of just felt like we were, well, recapping how he feels. As we proceed to Act 3, Astarion reminds us of who awaits us. It's Cazador, of course. He seems to have fully accepted the idea now of taking his master's place and ascending, stating that it would make him a more powerful bastard and that the souls he'd sacrifice would have probably been asking for their deaths anyway, just like Astarion once did while he was imprisoned. There is some more of that naivety showing once more, and something I want us to consider is a character trait that really shows itself here in Act 3. Astarion often sees things in a rather straightforward manner, and if you remember earlier, I stated he gets really tunnel-visioned. Earlier in Act 2, Astarion says something to the tune regarding the gods and heroes not coming to save him from Cazador, stating that it was the Mind Flayers that saved him, so in a manner of speaking, they're more heroes than the actual heroes. In this scene, he states that the only problem he has with what Cazador is doing is that he did all these terrible things to him, Astarion. What all of this tells us going into the third act, and what all of this has built to, is that Astarion has a very literal way of looking at things, especially when it comes to power and right versus wrong. It's been a while since we brought up a point of why some audience members hate Astarion, but I would guess, and perhaps this is the biggest reason, this black and white way of thinking, paired with his morals, might be a reason that some folks dislike Astarion. And again, I get it. But there is a basis for this behavior. I feel the implied trauma over the course of 200 years certainly explained why Astarion thought this way, and it made sense to me why going into the third act of the game, he has decided to opt in for the ritual. He seeks safety through power first and foremost, and everything he's seen in his life suggests that beating up people in the streets, killing people, enslaving them, etc., gives you everything you want and more. Is it so wrong to want to have a life like that, where you feel safe and live in a big palace? Well, for Tav and the party who can see more truth and aren't so tunnel-visioned, it's up to them to steer Astarion either away or towards this rather vengeful path. And it certainly seems like we're headed down a path that will be hard to talk Astarion out of. But thankfully, Larian cleverly inserted some deterrence. First up is if we run into the Gur camp. Running into the Gur, we meet what's left of them. Their leader, Olma, asks Astarion for a truce, before then asking him to help them by finding the children he stole from them. Astarion claims that the children are dead. He stole them and brought them to Cazador himself, but Olma counters that Astarion never saw his master feed, and that if nothing else, helped them with getting revenge. For which Astarion is more than happy to oblige. Reintroducing the Gur here is a nice touch and a good callback to Act 1. The same people who Astarion is racist towards, but also the people who were the prelude to Cazador finding him, are good use of narrative real estate. Admittedly, I'm not sure how much I believe them willingly letting Astarion live or trusting him to help them despite Olma giving him this mission, but I won't really knock this scene. But the better part of this scene is setting the emotional hooks for Astarion, who, up to this point, hasn't really faced the consequences of his actions. Learning that Astarion took kids and hurt the Gur people here is another notch in messed up things he's done, and another to add to the I Hate Astarion Club. I do wish we could have gotten a Gur mother screaming at him, maybe blaming him for her son's death. You wouldn't have to have Astarion openly apologizing, but rather try to explain his behavior away as him just trying to survive. It's what Astarion doesn't say that leads us to wonder if he feels any guilt. For the first time, he isn't a victim of Cazador solely. No, he played a big part in destroying other people's lives. Let's move on. The next scene we get is when we stumble upon Astarion's siblings. Not his actual blood siblings, but rather the spawn he spent probably over 150 years with, suffering right alongside them with Cazador. His siblings think that the ritual will ascend them alongside Cazador, and Astarion crashes the party, grabbing Petros and pulling him towards the window, a la Blade style. He demands to know where Cazador is hiding, and eventually, they tell him that he's hiding beneath his palace, inside a chapel that's all the way beneath the palace, hidden from, well, everybody. Astarion hurls Petros back, as Petros and Dal can't even recognize who or what Astarion is anymore. He drops a line here that, unlike earlier in his Act 2 romance scene, states his theme pretty clear, and it fits very well here. I'm more than what I was. I'm not afraid of anything anymore. The vampire twins disappear, and Astarion gloats that his idiot siblings will return to Cazador full of fear. He is still dead set on sacrificing his siblings for ultimate power, even stating that he'd prefer to kill a different family, but if it has to be this one, he'll kill his siblings, citing that they're just as guilty as Astarion is, and they brought back in just as many victims as he did. The last piece of dialogue Astarion gives us is one of worry, curious if we're going to back down from helping him. He reiterates that helping him with this would make him extremely happy. And with that, the scene ends. Okay, wow. Combining pretty much everything across the board here in this scene, we get some brushstrokes filled with manipulation as Astarion coddles you back into helping him. Don't we want to make him happy, he asks? To his lust for revenge by torturing Petros for information on Cazador. To his extremely selfish desires and disinterest in others by willingly throwing away his siblings for his goals. In between that all, you get these little nuggets of Astarion growing his self-worth, like stating that he isn't afraid, regardless if that's true or not, and a contradiction due to him feeling pity for his siblings, and even trying to convince them that this ritual won't offer them freedom. It's some triple-layered stuff. This little tennis game in Act 3 that we have as we bounce between the Gur to the Spawn really showcases the duality within Astarion. On the surface, despite how much he's grown already, he's still a scared Spawn that is growing into the next Cazador on one hand, while at the same time, perhaps the man that once was, or in an attempt to salvage what is left of the man he was 200 years ago, Astarion contradicts himself in his slight care for his siblings, and for agreeing to help the Gur. This final confrontation with Cazador is being set up brilliantly. And we're going to get one final scene of build-up, when following a long rest, Astarion's siblings return. Not the same ones, mind you, but they do return. Astarion, turning the Cazador notch to 10, lies to them, asking for oaths of fealty as he promises that he'll kill Cazador and ascend. Then he'll free his siblings. He is completely lying here. And this is more of a dissension into the cycle of abuse, which, funny enough, I think is the first time I've used that phrase in the whole video so far, which is pretty impressive. I'll be using it more in our review of Astarion's story, however, so don't worry. The Astarion we have going into this fight isn't the same guy at the beginning of the game, and that's good. He's more confident, cocky, powerful, cunning, and hungrier for revenge. I would say that at this point he's losing himself to revenge, it seems. So what's going to happen at the climax of his story? Cazador's palace is just such a cool area of the game. It might be in my top 5, I'm unsure. But what I am sure about is that anything with ghastly vampires, conspiracy theories, and then whatever the heck this random backrooms that Cazador has, had me completely hooked the first time I played through this game. And of course, Astarion has a lot of unique lines, which we'll get to the ones that push his story further along in a few moments. And of course, Astarion has a lot of unique lines, which we'll get to the ones that push his story further along in a few moments. This place just reeks of mystery and evil. I love it. We've heard so many things about Cazador, so the hype before meeting him is absolutely palpable. The first scene that we're going to cover is finding Velioth's scroll. This is the first and only time we hear about Velioth, as we learn that he was Cazador's master. And, like Cazador did to Astarion, Velioth abused the living piss out of Cazador. But, like the Rule of Two from the Sith in Star Wars, eventually Cazador killed his master and boiled his skull. This is his skull. Here is that said skull. It's a pretty cool piece of lore, but it also lends credence to the cycle of abuse theme that I'll discuss soon. Also, I found it odd that Astarion had nothing to say here as we read this scroll. I'm not expecting any kind of sympathy here, but maybe Astarion notices the similarities. Maybe he comments that it's what Cazador deserved, failing to see that Cazador was in the same position Astarion is/was. The next scene specifically is the second best scene of this entire mission, and perhaps one of the best pieces of visual, audio, and literary storytelling in Astarion's entire arc. Sebastian. As you make your way down the chambers, this sudden reveal that Astarion and his siblings kidnapped these people over 200 years ago, and they're still alive, is so sickly. It's an extremely disturbing twist as we theorize that there is well over 1,000 people in these chambers. But as we and Astarion are experiencing this, Sebastian recognizes Astarion. And you know what? Astarion recognizes him. His face shifts, his tone drops. The next line out of Astarion's mouth is, in my opinion, the voice of Astarion before he was turned. The way he says, Sebastian, is so different from the tone he had seconds before, a tone of disgust. The fact Astarion remembers that Sebastian had never been kissed either implies that Astarion remembers all of his victims, or that Sebastian was special, that perhaps he made Astarion feel something more. Sebastian calling out Astarion for lying and destroying him also fits extremely well here. We've seen that behavior already. Him yelling out to Astarion that he wants to kill him is a perfect duality and an extremely clever use of a mirror technique. Sebastian is Astarion, and Astarion at this moment is Cazador. Oh good gracious, this is how you write a masterful scene. The turn from Astarion, swearing his word, which isn't really good for much, but still, swearing that he's going to free Sebastian is also very powerful. In the debrief with Astarion, it's clear that his past has caught up to him, and he's forced to see the error of his ways. This sets the stage wonderfully, but can we go back to the Sebastian scene for one more moment? When I talk about good writing, that scene is an example of it. Outside of the Gur, we've yet to really get something that actually moved Astarion. In fact, not much has happened outside of the romance with him that's moved him. He's usually very sassy and coy, but the slow and low, almost hushed way of him speaking, deviating from the norm for him, says something. Him remembering those small details, as previously mentioned, suggests him remembering those he took, or at least those who made him feel loved and seen. Astarion revealing that Sebastian has been down here for 170 years implies that Sebastian might have been the first person he kidnapped. The relationship dynamic acting as some narrative symbolism where Astarion is a Cazador to all of these people down here is fantastic storytelling. That's what we call showing your character the error of his ways, and it was 100% the right call. We get a scene with the Gur kids too, where it's practically the same thing as Sebastian, and in my opinion lacks the punch, since Sebastian meant something, and his words actually cut through Astarion. Here, Astarion kind of shrugs off everything as just Cazador's orders. It's a stark tonal shift, since how can he go from seeing Sebastian and clearly feeling the weight of his actions to suddenly tiptoeing around them here? It's a little bit odd. Perhaps if you found the Gur kids first, and this is his reaction, okay. Then you can follow up with the Sebastian scene, and where we think Astarion will deflect again, he doesn't, instead getting much more sentimental. That would maybe elevate the moment a bit more. But now we come to the climactic moment. Astarion and Tav approach Cazador in this really freaking cool looking dungeon. Man, writing aside for 2 seconds to appreciate the gameplay and design, this fight is so cool. Okay, back to the writing. There he is, Cazador, in all of his sniveling little glory. Astarion looks scared as, like an abusive parent, Cazador lashes into him, chastising him over and over again until eventually Astarion breaks and attempts to strike his master. With a wry smile, Cazador wiggles his staff and sends Astarion into the final pillar, activating the ritual. What follows is probably one of my personal favorite boss fights in the entire game. A fight that, would you believe, on my very first playthrough, I didn't do. This game was ruining my life in the best and worst way, and simply put, I needed to be done. So when it came time to limit my time on the game, so to speak, I looked at this quest and realized that it didn't really have much main involvement in the story, and thus it was sacrificed. Well, what a fool I was. As you defeat Cazador, we now get Astarion's best scene, and an extremely high peak, both in regards to payoff and this game's ability to write people, not just characters. Astarion rips Cazador out of his sarcophagus and is extremely angry. He picks up Cazador's knife and stares his former master down. And here we are at the crucial fork in the road. Ascension or redemption? Let's entertain what is, in my opinion, the better of the two narrative options in terms of cohesion, rejecting Ascension first. Astarion will attempt to convince us using the same old manipulative tactics as before, citing that all the power he'll get from ascending is exactly what Tav wants for him, to be happy, to be free. If we connect our tadpoles, we learn that he, in this moment, is afraid, but more so is blinded by what Ascension might give him, that same freedom to be anything and do anything. Unfortunately, Astarion, unlike Gale or Shadowheart, who have a built-in calculator for their own big choice that is dependent on player action and certain events, Astarion doesn't have that. So you have to convince him here not to undertake the ritual. In what amounts to a pretty easy speech check, suddenly, Astarion admits that he can be better than Cazador. Oh, okay, we're gonna come back to this, but let's just finish this scene. Despite being better than Cazador, Astarion is not above revenge, however, and he goes full Rambo on Cazador, screaming as he stabs his master over and over again, letting out years of pain with each thrust. After he is done, we get a very, very powerful moment of him simply sobbing. No lines, just these sobs. More of that release, I would imagine, and this moment is brilliant. This right here is much better. As the rite is stopped, Astarion's siblings surround him, asking him if it's over, to which he assures them that it is. His tone has switched a bit to that of the eldest sibling taking care of the others. He is then asked what should happen to the 7,000 captured souls within. I can understand people's reasoning for both outcomes, but for the purposes of this path, let's go with Astarion releasing everyone. In this choice, Astarion acknowledges that these people shouldn't have to suffer solely because he lured them to their doom, and so he lets them go, and in a rare moment of leadership instructs his siblings to take everyone to the Underdark, where they might be a little bit safer. Stopping here for a moment, let's analyze what I'd call Astarion's good ending. Overall, it's actually kind of a mixed bag. Am I the only one that feels like him making this choice almost feels entirely like Tav's choice? And that there were far too few moments of Astarion wondering what it meant to reject the ritual, what it meant to be good. I mean, he seemed pretty confident of going through with it until we stopped him. When he ascends, his entire personality shifts, but in a fantasy world, I'm going to allow that given that the ritual implies that it would change him if he underwent it. Here, also suddenly, it feels like Astarion is now more of an anti-hero, and I'm not really buying it. Despite seeing the scroll and the people he kidnapped, he still wants to go through with the ritual. Maybe if they'd presented this slightly differently, perhaps showing the struggle a bit more within Astarion, I would believe this sudden change in his arc. The thing is, they do allow you to connect to his tadpole, and the game reveals his feelings on Ascension, but there isn't really a mention of any doubts, other than some fear. If we want to try and interpret why Astarion wants Ascension, despite all of the factors that we just discussed, it might be the following. He doesn't want the power to protect people or to save the ones he kidnapped. Not at all. It's basically spelled out for us. He wants to feel safe and never be at a risk of being powerless ever again. He was molded into less than nothing, so this is him rebuilding himself. I just feel like this choice should have had more say for Astarion. And well, I guess it does have a say. Astarion wants to do it. He is blinded in this moment more than any other by his greed and selfishness. Is this another reason why people dislike him, perhaps? That even here at his biggest moment, he's still only thinking of himself? Maybe. Look, I've got nothing wrong with the character rejecting change. It's a writing pathway available for characters. My problem just lies in the arc that feels forced for him, which is strange because I feel like so little of Astarion's story felt forced, and instead it was pretty much allowed to breathe naturally. Act 3 sort of felt like Larian forgot to give Astarion any semblance of growth towards something more. And that's why we got the Gur camp, Sebastian, the Scroll, and the Gur kids. Now, barring the Gur kids, since it felt a bit redundant, I'm not complaining that they added this stuff. I'm just curious how it seemingly had no effect on Astarion. In our debrief with him, we tell him that stopping the Black Mass was the right thing to do, which he agrees, citing that it does still sting. He wonders if forfeiting the ability to walk in the sun is the price of such freedom from Cazador. If you romanced Astarion, he'll then invite you to a place within the city. That place is a graveyard. Standing in front of his own grave, Astarion remarks that he hasn't been here since he was turned. He remarks that for all this time, he's been dead, and should try living again. Using the same knife that he pulled on us earlier in the very first scene where we meet him, he fixes his grave, and I presume he crosses out his death day. I'm not exactly sure. We just kind of see a line in the tombstone, so I'm assuming here. But Astarion then gets a little bit more serious with the player, admitting his love, but also admitting that with Tav, he feels both seen and he feels safe. He admits that he has learned that love isn't about making tactical alliances or manipulation. He takes your hands, and the two of you have a romance scene in the graveyard. This is why some people like him, isn't it? That completes Astarion's romance if he ends up as a spawn, and I think this scene is overall sweet. It's pretty emotionally mature from Astarion, and him returning to his grave is symbolic. He says it himself. He's been dead 200 years. His life hasn't been his. But now, he has his life back, and the first thing he wants to do with his freedom is be with you, to love you. It's a fairly well done romance scene where, yes, romance occurs, but we get a very nice glimpse of the man who perhaps existed once long ago, the gentle lover, the kind soul. The callback to his knife almost rebirthing him as he crosses out his death day is also a nice visual touch, and like I said earlier, is a nice callback. If you didn't romance Astarion, you instead will get this debrief scene where he'll openly acknowledge that he was an entirely different person back in the chamber, that he was blinded by power like Cazador, that Tav saved him. Again, this is pretty on the nose stuff. Perhaps this is what I felt was missing from that climactic moment. I feel like if you moved this scene, this realization for Astarion, to the moment he has to decide between ascension or refusing the power, and add in a bit of an argument, some conflict, and a teensy bit of visual storytelling, then the completion of his arc would have felt better overall, much more narratively speaking. Like, think about this. Astarion, having seen all that he's seen and assuming Tav has pushed him to be a kinder person, might get into an argument with Tav. Give Astarion that agency to defy Tav's orders at first. Allow that blindness to wash over Astarion. Have Tav not give up on their friend, however. Have Tav remind Astarion of the time they spent together. Perhaps using the tadpole, you could show Astarion seeing those memories of Sebastian and trying to fight the memories away. Have his eyes dart to his siblings in pain, to Tav pleading, then to Cazador, grimacing at his spawn. And that is when Astarion realizes he's no better than his master. In a flash, he stops himself. He makes the choice to walk away from that power, but only if you've chosen certain decisions and he's seen the errors of his ways. Have him sob as he stabs Cazador if you want. Keep the crying scene, but now it means more. Astarion is taking a leap of faith in his friends and himself, that he doesn't need this power to keep him safe. Astarion is taking a leap of faith in his friends and himself, that he doesn't need this power to keep him safe. But at the same time, he knows what he's just given up. He knows what he could have been. Him realizing his flaw is what allows him to change, and the moment that he does is the moment he completes his arc. He completes that outer goal of killing Cazador, but it's Astarion accepting change that leads to him completing this arc. Having this scene here just feels like Larian wants to make sure that the player knows what kind of arc Astarion came from. It's similar to his Act 2 romance, where, oddly, a lot of what Astarion says is just explaining his character arc, thoughts, his dilemma, and his issues. I'd have appreciated that being shown a bit more here, and perhaps this scene being something else. Perhaps of Astarion still pondering what could have been, but perhaps more confident in the choice he made, realizing it would have been the wrong one. Maybe we have a moment with Astarion being very introspective, shuddering at the thought of him even considering that idea. I'll withhold discussing Astarion's endings for now. Instead, let's go back in time, back to that crucial choice. We saw how refusing Ascension softens Astarion up, gives him that happy ending, that freedom, that humanity that he didn't really have. But if he accepts Ascension, is this path better written? Let's find out. With this path, we get a fully corrupted Astarion who has taken the plunge into the world of ambition and power. The scene of him carving the same demonic carvings into Cazador is brutal. The scene involving the red mist, his siblings' cries, and then silence after 7,007 souls all die is so eerie. No punches were pulled here. Astarion is immediately far different than who we knew before, and he only progressively gets more and more sadistic and power-hungry as time goes on. When we speak with him immediately following the ritual, he acknowledges that he's finally escaped Cazador, but quickly moves into the powers he has, how he can already hear cries from those that will serve him, and he'll gladly control them and use them. When we speak with him back at camp, he's kind of surprised that we let him kill all of the spawn, and he tells us that we can tell ourselves whatever we need to in order to justify it. He's just happy that we let them go through with it. Astarion's tone has shifted to one not too dissimilar to Cazador here, even referring to us as his pet and his consort. Further conversations really showcase that you, especially if you romanced Astarion and let him turn you, have become what he was to Cazador. Sure, it's not as gruesome as what Cazador did to Astarion, but it's manipulation, and it's still control. And this is the third time I believe I'll use the word, but in this ending, the cycle of abuse continues. Astarion has devolved into the very thing he was taught and brought up to be. He saw how monsters rule the world, and became one. Tav is his pet, consort, plaything, whatever you want to call it. He's actually killed the final fragment of who he once was. Now he's almost more Cazador than he is Astarion. I like the commitment to this too. It's a seriously messed up choice, and is the exact outcome I'd expect for him, rejecting change, and instead leading into his negative traits that he showcased throughout the game. I mentioned in my best lines video that Ascended Astarion has some beautifully written lines if you romanced him, and that's true. If you attempt to break up with him, he changes into a very spiteful abuser that he always truthfully was. Sure, he was nice to you as long as you followed along, but when you compare him to Cazador, he snaps, and for a brief moment, that scared little elf re-emerges. This whole power he's gained is just one more big mask for him to put on. It's truly horrifying seeing the monster you helped create, and credit to Larian here. For me, this is the more believable of the two arcs somehow. And now we get to the endings for Astarion, before we wrap things up with my final thoughts. Starting with Spawn Astarion, on the docks, when the sun finally hits his skin again, he kind of comically runs off back into the darkness. It's a bit depressing knowing how much he loved the sun, and a reminder, as Astarion mentioned, that this was the price for his freedom. In the epilogue party, if you didn't kill Cazador like I did on my first playthrough, Astarion lives in fear that Cazador might yet stumble upon him, and as such, Astarion has relegated himself to eating vermin and living a pretty sad life in the sewers. You can promise Astarion that you'll go back and kill Cazador, to which a scared Astarion thanks you, hoping that it'll all be over soon. If you killed Cazador and spared the spawn, then Astarion winds up moving to the Underdark and being this unsung leader of the spawn. In this ending, he has more of that anti-hero aura about him, but also it's a nice touch that the spawn who rose up against the Master is now guiding the other spawn perhaps on how to be better and how to cope with the trauma. How to live. And I actually like this scene more if you hadn't romanced him, because he'll actually discuss how he's enjoying helping others, how he burnt Cazador's palace down and erased the ritual entirely. He's fully committed to helping, and he abandoned any chance left of returning to start the ritual again. It's some really good character growth. Mind you, Astarion still has a twinge of that control, stating that he does have to keep the spawn in line, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. He says himself that he isn't a tyrant, but that examples do need to be made. If you didn't save the spawn, Astarion becomes kind of this mercenary in the city, a blade for hire, which is kind of lazy, and I'm not too hot on this outcome. A mercenary? Really? That's what Astarion decided to do with his life after finding freedom. Ascended Astarion has less variety in his endings, since you have to have killed Cazador and the Spawn. In this ending, his level of sass and cockiness is at max settings, revealing that he now lives in Cazador's palace, sires several Spawn and servants, and has plans to extend his rule far beyond Baldur's Gate. His ambition knows no bounds, and his lust for power extends well past the needs of one man. Romancing him, you get more manipulative language, like, "I'm always watching." And if you attempt to break up with him, he just won't allow it, stating that he knows what's best for you, and he won't let you throw away such a good life. And that's pretty much the bulk of Astarion's story. Now, let's break down a few things in the ending before overviewing his story as a whole. In regards to the endings for Astarion, I found most to be underwhelming. Ascended Astarion still boasts some drama, and is certainly a transformation for him. It provides enough of a glimpse into his negative arc by using clever written language, changing his attire, attitude, and demeanor. It feels like a bad ending, and to me that's because it is. The arc overall feels very much believable. For his good endings as a Spawn, I am a fan of him being this beacon of hope in the Underdark for his fellow Spawn. It keeps consistent with that leadership quality that emerged following him rejecting the Ascension, and it's also a pretty unique angle for Astarion, and certainly not where I thought he'd end up. Also, him using his own experience of overcoming trauma to help others, other than himself, is fantastic. I would have loved to get an origin ending showing him helping others, but the most you get is him making that choice while sitting in some ruins below ground. You do get an origin exclusive ending for Astarion where he's hiding from the sun before finding a man who is just sitting in this cave randomly before Astarion opts to bite the man, either killing him or just tasting his blood, which is a bit confusing with regards to where his arc landed him moments before, but oh well. Moving to my review of this character's story. As I said at the start, from the start, this character has perhaps the most psychologically in-depth story. A lot of his story is one involving his inner journey, but he does have a fairly easy to follow outer plotline too, that mixes mystery and eventually a showdown with Cazador. With Astarion, I think the reason he segmented so much of the community is partly due to this. If I asked you what your favorite movie was, I think we would all have a different answer. Original point though. Some people probably hate films like this because the main character is an asshole and irredeemable, and that's fair. People want someone to get behind. For example, if you watched a horror film where the killer just kills everyone and gets the best ending possible, I think a very small percentage of people would find that to be a satisfying ending. Movies are not meant to be like real life. Bad people should get bad endings. Not all the time. It's not some golden rule, but again, you have to do it right if you're going to give a bad character the best possible ending. Maybe it's a sequel setup or something along those lines. I think for some of the community, what Astarion does through the game is simply inexcusable. He murders and lies for fun. He tries to kill you, tries to bite you, has kidnapped well over 1,000 people, he tortures his siblings, he has this desire to ascend, and is willing to sacrifice over 7,000 souls to get what he wants. If he gets what he wants, he refers to you as his pet, and by the end can turn into a full-blown manipulator. He's an ass, full stop. I've seen some Astarion fans try to justify this behavior, and allow me to support you slightly in this direction. I understand that 200 years of trauma can break anybody. It molded Astarion, and it's made very clear to the audience that all Astarion knows is power and manipulation get you what you want. How can we realistically expect a person to think otherwise? For those that say Astarion was free and therefore didn't have to do the things he did, I would say yes, that's true, but also, he is traumatized. He doesn't want to go back. The whole point with Astarion is that no one showed him another way, not until Tav. And even then, the trauma goes so deep that Astarion will do almost anything so that he never has to feel like that again. I'd like to circle that as his main character arc, and it makes for an interesting story. Reversing centuries of trauma and stopping the cycle of hate. I think where the Astarion hater camp might have a point, however, is in the execution of that arc, where he changes for the better. Act 2's romance sequence and Act 3's choice to have him reject Ascension were both called out by me for being both a little bit quick and a little bit on the nose, but also tonally a little bit off. Astarion trends pretty much in one direction in his story, becoming more and more like Cazador. He has moments in his romance, for example, or small moments where we help him and he says thank you, but these don't really seem as interconnected by the time we get to the third act, or when he needs to make the ultimate choice. I think a criticism I'd afford is that while him rejecting Ascension was a cool moment, it doesn't feel like Astarion made that choice. It doesn't feel like he was conscious of all that he saw, instead having Tav be the one to point all of this out to him. Astarion doesn't really soften up, so while I can praise his character arc regression angle specifically, and I can praise some of the positive change he undergoes in the alternate ending, it isn't perfect. In fact, at times, in the third act especially, Astarion just states the obvious with regards to his arc, and we already addressed how perhaps a defter touch could have been taken earlier on to plant seeds of change. And keep in mind, I myself didn't feel the need to finish this mission on my first run. When writing this video, I asked myself why I did Gale's mission, Shadowheart's mission, and the House of Hope, but not this. And honestly, it didn't feel as important to the main story, but also, it didn't really feel like the arc was there. Maybe given Astarion's attitude up to this point, and remember, things like Sebastian and the Scroll all got stuffed into Cazador's mansion, meant that for players, including myself, maybe we just didn't see a different path for Astarion. It felt like he was just going to either ascend or reject it, but the game didn't really give us any sneak peek into what a redeemed Astarion would do. It wasn't until subsequent playthroughs that I did his personal quest, and upon seeing it, I was pleasantly blown away, but then my mind wondered why these seeds weren't shown a bit earlier. When I romanced Astarion, my mind again wondered why seemingly everything pointed to Astarion just not becoming like his master. I understand that's a large part of his arc, but perhaps him finding himself again could have been a larger narrative point, and perhaps if we introduced that, we maybe could have seen the softer side of Astarion that would then make his redemption arc, so to speak, a little bit more believable. I think for Astarion, he, like Karlach, benefits from phenomenal voice work. While I think Astarion's story overall is pretty well put together, it does go to say that it's not perfect. I find it impressive also that Astarion, despite being the only recruitable companion with literally zero relation to the main plot of the game, still stands as one of its better written characters. It's very impressive. But ultimately, he does have the fan base split. There are those that love Astarion's deeply wounded past. He's a character that many people can relate to due to abusive exes or parents, siblings, or bosses. For that same reason, he might trigger some people who suffered similar fates, and that's why they dislike him or refuse to play with him. For some, they love the vampire romance and being degraded by ascended Astarion, and like I said, I'm not going to judge you if that's you. Others probably hate that dynamic and are turned off by the same thing, which is fair. For some, they empathize with him as a victim, while others find his reasoning for his behavior inexcusable and believe he is using his victim card wrongly. Some find him funny. Others find him utterly annoying. Some people love vampires, and others hate them. Here's the thing about Astarion, and one final praise I'll give Larian, despite my earlier critique asking for slightly more of that softer side to come out. Larian wanted to make a statement with his character. They stuck to their guns, knowing that some people would hate this character and his shtick. Astarion is authentically himself, and I believe this is why his character feels very real. But why his arc for pretty much the entire game, barring the third act, progresses at a fairly natural and believable pace. He is a selfish person. He's hungry for power, afraid, anxious, and deeply traumatized. And Larian leaned into all of that. They showcased through at times subtlety, and at other times blatant on-the-nose dialogue that Astarion was made to be the way he is. Is he the best written character in the game? I don't think so personally. I do enjoy his story, however. Is the love justified as much as the hate is justified? Yes, I think so. I definitely understand both camps. And that is it. My word. How many pages are we at? Holy crap, we're at 30 pages. I knew this analysis was going to be a long one, folks, and I knew we'd have to cover a lot. I spent a lot of time writing this script, and I did read through it a few times and tried to polish up my points where I could. I feel like we could spend another 2 hours discussing morality with this character, or where the writing could have been better, but my goal was to analyze his writing as a whole, and provide an overview on my thoughts, and answer a few questions. I think I see why some people love or hate him, as we discussed a moment ago, and I feel safe to say that his story and writing overall are fantastic. It's a story I enjoyed re-reviewing and a story that got better the more I played. It's not flawless, however, and no, I don't think it's the best story in the game. If you folks enjoyed this video, you let me know. With this video's conclusion, this officially wraps up all of the origin characters, and a new poll will be up with more characters that we can analyze in Baldur's Gate 3. So head on over to my poll and vote for who you'd want to see next. Thank you all very, very much for your support, and I really hope everyone liked this video. Furthermore, I hope I haven't started another war in the comments. Please have mercy on me. I'm off to go take a much-needed break in the sun and go pet my cats. I suggest you do the same. If you don't have a cat, buy one. With that being said, everyone, take care of yourselves, be safe, and be well. Thank you all very, very much, as always, and I'll see you all very, very soon. Bye-bye.